Excellent. Good
J'attends.
day, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. This is the first of our webinars that is hosted by the IEA Informal Work Technical Committee. And the title for today's presentation or webinar is on ergonomics and human factors in the informal work sector. We are a brand new technical committee as of formed just as of last year, and we have a slew of presenters today. So I will give a very quick introduction to our presenters, give you a little bit of background about informal work, and then we will jump into each of the excellent presentations that we have lined up for today. My name is Clive D'Souza. I'm a faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh and currently the chair for the IEA Informal Work Technical Committee. Going on to the rest of our presenters, first we will have Dr. Maggie Graf. Dr. Graf is the IEA Vice President and Secretary General, as well as a member of the Swiss Economic Society. And then after Dr. Graf's presentation, we will hear from Dr. Augustine Aqua, who is at the University of Ghana, and he will be speaking to us about his research work involving informal e-waste workers, and his presentation will be jointly given by himself and Dr. Bernard Martin from the University of Michigan. Both Dr. Aqua and Dr. Martin are founding members of and active members as well of the Informal Work Technical Committee. Next, we will have Dr. Somnath Gangopadhyay, who is speaking to us from India. And so he will be sharing some of his perspectives about informal work in India. Professor Somnath is a professor at the University of Calcutta, and he is also the chair for the International Commission on Occupational Health Scientific Committee for Small-Scale Enterprises and the Informal Sector. After Dr. Somnath, we will hear from Dr. Akran Salman Navarro, who is speaking to us from New York University. Dr. Salman Navarro is also the chair for the International Commission on Occupational Health Scientific Committee for Occupational Health for Health Workers. So we'll be hearing about some of his excellent research work involving informal workers in New York City. And finally, we'll be hearing from Dr. Paulo Antonio Barros Oliveira. He will be speaking to us about informal work in Brazil. So he'll be sharing his perspectives about informal work. And currently, Dr. Paulo is the co-chair for the IEA International Development Standing Committee. So again, we have a slew of presenters, and so we'll be moving quickly between them each. But very quickly, just to set the context for today's webinar, I've already done the introductions for our speakers. I will give you a very short introduction about informal work next, and just set the context for who we are as a technical committee and why we thought it was important to have this committee. Sharing the IEA's perspective about informal work, we will have Dr. Maggie Graf, and so she'll be speaking very briefly about the IEA's perspective. Next, as I mentioned before, we will hear about short presentations from around the world, at least to kick off this webinar series. We'll hear about informal work research from Ghana by Drs. Aqua and Martin. We'll hear about informal work in India by Professor Somnath, informal work in New York City by Dr. Akran Salman Navarro, and lastly, informal work in Brazil. Dr. Maggie Graf will be moderating today's Q&A, which we will conduct during the last 30 minutes of today's webinar, if we are able to stay on track. So, just to set the context, what is informal work? It's a challenging topic to research. It's difficult to measure, it's difficult to study, because again, it often occurs in the shadows. But the ILO defines informal work as all economic activity by workers and economic units that are in law or in practice not covered insufficiently or insufficiently covered or not at all covered by formal work arrangements. So what do we mean by this? So if workers lack any formal contracts, formal job employments, formal or signed work agreements, all of those types of jobs that fall otherwise under formal arrangements, these are informal work. One question that does arise is, why study informal work? How prevalent is it? And recent statistics from the International Labor Organization indicate that globally, there are over 2 billion people. That's more than 61% of all employed people work in the informal economy. That is, they work without any formal work arrangements or contracts. If we look at a global distribution, just a quick map about where informal work occurs, we will notice a couple of things. Again, this is a graph based on data from the ILO, and you'll see that a lot of the informal work is concentrated in the global south, right? Particularly in the continents of Africa and Asia, particularly Southeast Asia, as well as in South America. But one thing that we notice based on these colors is that no country, regardless of whether they are in the low or middle income or high income, no country is immune from informal work. Informal work occurs in every country around the world, perhaps to a different extent or in different work domains or industry sectors, but it does occur. And these workers face very unique challenges that other formal workers do not experience, particularly in the context of human factors and ergonomics. What I'm showing you here is a slide from research work that was done in Ghana, and Drs. Augustine and Dr. Bernard Martin will be speaking more about this in their presentation, about informal work in Ghana, particularly in the electronic waste processing sector. But what we have seen globally is that for hundreds of millions of workers, informal work, or more colloquially termed as informality, means a lack of social protection, rights at work, and their ability to advocate for decent work conditions. This makes workers, informal workers, very susceptible to various kinds of exploitation, other psychosocial vulnerabilities. There are also issues with access to protective equipment, as might be indicated from this slide over here, and the lack of occupational health and safety training and safe work practices. What this also tells us that these issues related to informal work and worker health are very complex. And it's not just human factors and ergonomics that will hold the answer to this. Of course, we are an integral part of trying to understand and help alleviate some of these problems, but it also indicates that we will need to be collaborating with researchers and colleagues in other disciplines as well. That includes occupational health, industrial hygiene, epidemiology, sociology, and other aspects of economics, even to understand and address some of these concerns. So I hope the recurring theme in today's webinar, as well as in subsequent webinars that we host, is that this cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary approach to addressing some of these problems, as well as collaborations across different countries to understand the local context where some of this informal work occurs. So based on some of the work that I was involved with Dr. Augustine and Dr. Bernard in Ghana, it piqued my interest in informal work. And a couple of us over the last few years have been talking about this more and more, and we've noticed work or ergonomics research happening about the informal sector in various different silos. And this provided the motivation for us to try and create a group where we can discuss and address some of these issues collectively. And that formed the origins or the original ideas to have a technical committee devoted to informal work. So you can read more about our technical committee on our website, which I have linked over here, but just a few key points. So we are a group that was formed just last year, thanks to support from the IEA leadership. And our focus is on the human factors and ergonomics issues in the informal sector. While our focus emphasizes work happening in low and middle income countries, as I mentioned before, the informal economy also has its own unique challenges in higher or developed countries. We are focused as a group. We meet monthly, and we discuss and strategize about how tools might be adapted to address physical ergonomics issues and musculoskeletal disorders in the informal sector. We focus on research collaborations, as well as discuss opportunities for exchange of students and research knowledge between countries across the economic spectrum. And we are also actively participating in various different conferences. We recently presented at the ICO Global Congress. We'll be presenting at the IEA Congress in South Korea, where we have a special session. And so if any of you are interested, you have a variety of different ways to engage with us on these issues. You can join our monthly meetings. Coincidentally, our next monthly meeting is tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. US Eastern Time. I have presented here the contact information for myself as the chair of this technical committee, as well as for our co-chairs. For Asia, Dr. Muzamil; for Africa, Dr. Augustine; for Latin America, Dr. Garagay. We are looking for a co-chair for Europe, so if anyone is interested, please reach out to us. Again, if you're interested in any of these issues or would like to participate in any of our activities, I highly encourage you to contact us. And we'd be more than welcome to increase our ranks as we try to understand some of these very complex issues regarding informal work. So that is the end of what I have to speak. I will now hand it off to my colleague and co-presenter, Dr. Maggie Guelph.
Thank you very much, Clive. You've actually saved me some work, because I've just deleted a couple of my slides, which repeated what you said. I'll just start up again, and we'll head off. Okay, can you see that? Are you all able to see it? Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about, firstly, is why the IEA is concerned with the informal sector in any case. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is that ergonomics and human factors is not confined to formal work. In fact, historically, there have been books published on ergonomics in the home and all sorts of non-work environments. But as Clive explained to you all, the informal sector is exceedingly large. In fact, on average, from the ILO statistics that Clive presented, probably more than half of the people who work in the world are somehow employed in the informal sector. It's found in all countries, as Clive also explained, and there are many health, well-being and performance improvement needs. Clive mentioned the physical needs, but there are other challenges for research as well. So I'm not going to repeat the definition that Clive gave. I would like to make a couple of points about it, though, to add to it and remind you. These people fall outside the protection of the normal legal system. And of course, there's no labour inspectors working in their sector. In fact, in some countries, the sector is frowned upon, considered illegal. This is part of the challenge of working there. But there are also wide definitions, variations in the definitions. Like some of the definitions include people in the agricultural sector. Many of people, of course, are farmers, they're self-employed, but one wouldn't normally classify them as being outside of the formal sector. But they employ people, and those often are. And I think in Europe, that's very, very common. There are a lot of illicit activities that are excluded from the formal work sector, and they're also not included in national statistics. Now, some of those we'd all agree are illicit, but there are other types of works, particularly in the sex industry, that would definitely qualify in most countries as informal work and probably should be considered because the needs of those people are just as great, maybe even greater. It's what also needs to be mentioned is that there's a lot of informal work within the formal sector where employees have not properly registered their employees, or where they're only on very short-term, part-term contracts. They're not officially recorded, and therefore they fall through the loop of all the social protection. And for all these reasons, the data is not very good. We can really only estimate how many people work in this sector, but we know it's a lot. The number of people is probably underreported. So going back to the IEA, it's interesting from a research point of view. There's a few challenges, as Clive has started to talk about. Many employers may have informal workers working for them, or workers working for them informally, however you want to say it. But they, of course, have got very little interest in having the spotlight focused on them because what they're doing may not be completely correct or legal. Many governments may not consider these workers important. For instance, they might be illegal migrants and therefore they should be removed. Or they are non-voting people because they're not citizens, or they just don't vote because they're part of a sector of the society that doesn't traditionally vote. So for many, many reasons, the governments of countries might not be interested in these groups. These two factors make getting funding for research rather difficult, but not impossible. And another big issue, which I'm sure other people will talk about later on in these presentations, is that they can be difficult to contact because they're not always organised. However, on the positive side, there hasn't been a lot of scientific work done in this area. So, the possibilities to get good publications out of it is certainly there. And there are many issues, not just physical, there are also cognitive and particularly organisational aspects. I think there one could talk about organisational aspects on many levels, not just the micro level of the worker and what he actually does and how he interacts with his employers or, well, they're not employers, but whoever gives them the work. But also on the higher levels, like the government, one can look at which particular governments have been more successful in improving the health and safety of these people. So what have we done so far? This is actually pretty much my last slide, Clive. As far as I'm aware, we had odd presentations from this section, but only just sort of odd ones in previous IEA triennial congresses. But the first special session on the theme, I think, was organised by Professor Martin in 2021. And that was where the group formed that Clive now chairs as a special interest group that was then formally accepted as a technical committee of the IEA at the beginning of last year. It is still growing and the meetings continue. We're now in collaboration with ICO, which perhaps Akran will mention later in this presentation. And this, of course, is the very first webinar in what is expected to be a series on the theme. There are a couple of special sessions programmed at IEA 2024, so if you haven't registered for that, please go ahead and do so. It's a hybrid conference, so if you can't make it to Jeju, you could perhaps attend online. And there are lots more exciting activities in the pipeline. including a congress on the theme in 2026. So please join us. You're all welcome. This photo was taken on one of our first meetings, but there'd now be too many people to put it on a picture. I think that we're on a hot topic here, and thank you, Clive, for taking the leadership. That's it from me. Clive, you need to turn your microphone on.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Maggie, and Augustine and Bernard, if you don't mind, you can share your slides now and we can transition to your presentation.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, Bernard, but you're in presenter mode. It's not the full screen. Yeah, it's in a lecture mode, I think. You can see the lecture notes.
So I probably shared the wrong screen, so I'm going to stop sharing and try again the share. Okay, so now I'm sharing Microsoft PowerPoint and that should be okay. Is that okay?
No.
Still?
Yeah. You can click those.
Let me disconnect the other screen. That's always the issue.
I think it's just that you were in the wrong mode. You clicked the wrong thing down the bottom.
It's always the same trouble with me.
Or I'll be happy to share your slides in advance.
Is that okay now?
Yeah, yes, it is. Good.
Now go.
Okay, sorry about that. So Augustine and myself are going to speak about the physical aspect of e-waste in Ghana, West Africa, and we'll focus on the work-related musculoskeletal disorder of these people exposed to this condition. First of all, I will show you that in fact okay, it has changed now. That informal work is almost everywhere in every sector in the world, and these are just a few examples. And in West Africa, there is a significant population working in the informal work, and especially young people as well. But I would like to highlight what has been stressed already by Clive and Maggie, that there are also other issues such as environmental conditions that could be seen here, as well as psychosocial issues, which is a slide that I borrowed from India. And so what is important to pay attention to is that although we focus now on the physical aspect, the combination of exposure, physical, environmental, organizational, psychosocial, need to be addressed as well. So here we will present the physical aspect about the work that has been done by Augustine, myself, and Clive in Ghana. So please, Augustine, present your part.
All right, thank you very much, Bernard. So our work focused on research that we did in Agbogbloshie in Accra, Ghana. So Agbogbloshie in Accra, Ghana is one of the largest e-waste dump sites. It's made up of people, low-wage workers, low-skill workers who recycle end-of-life electronics as a form of livelihood. So these workers would move from various parts of the country or various towns gathering end-of-life electronics, and then they dismantle these. In addition to that, there's also huge quantities of informal e-waste that is shipped, from developed countries into developing countries, which are also recycled. Bernard, you've stopped sharing your screen.
I share the screen. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's good. Thank you. All right. So the main problem here in Akogloche was that, unlike a lot of the formal type of work settings, assembly line type of work, a lot of formal type of industry work that you find in developed countries, and these workers had very highly variable tasks. People do different things at different times, and their work is a function of the availability of things that they have to dismantle. So someone will go to the site, and there may be nothing for them to dismantle until maybe later on in the day. And somebody may go out looking for scraps and may not find anything to work with, for that particular day. And so there was high variability in what people do. And when people are not able to function well in one form of work, they shift into other forms of work as well within the e-waste cycle recycling space, just to be able to function. So this high variability made it difficult to use existing economic assessment to quantify the exposures that these workers present. And so it necessitated the need for us to be able to develop methods that are adapted to this form of unstructured and highly variable type of work. Next slide. So e-waste recycling tasks, basically we group them into 3 tasks. So one group is what we call collectors. So these people move from place to place, collecting end-of-life electronics, and then they draw them on a cart and send them to the dismantling site in Akogloche. Now, when they have done that, another group of workers, often what they will do is they would sell these to these other group of workers we refer to as dismantlers, or sometimes some of the collectors themselves may be involved in some of the dismantling processes. So the second group, which is the dismantlers, will then pick these end-of-life electronics and then use very basic methods, hammer, chisel, to break apart the electronic items and then extract valuable metals from these items. Now, there are some components that cannot be dismantled, for example, copper wires and then other components. And so for these, the easiest way to extract the metal is to set them on fire, burn the insulation around them, and then be able to extract the copper. And that's the third group of workers we call burners. So they are at the site, and then people bring copper wires and other things to them. They burn them, extract the copper, and then they charge a fee for it. So these are the 3 main workers that go through these systematic process of collecting, dismantling, and burning in order to be able to extract valuable metals from e-waste. Next slide. So what we did was that we used the corner musculoskeletal discomfort questionnaire to quantify NSD exposures, but for the physical risk factors, we designed our own tool, which I'll show in the next 2 slides. Next slide. So this slide shows the coding guide that we developed for our tool. So our tool basically was assessing all the basic ergonomic risk factors: posture, forceful exertion, repetitive movement, contact stress, vibration. And what we did was that for these various posture categories, we looked at exposures in the neck, trunk, upper limbs, and then lower limbs. And for each of these, we had gradients for the exposures from normal to moderate to severe, depending on what risk factor we were classifying, and then the number of corresponding scales that we came up with based on the nature of the risk factor and the corresponding tax that were performed. So we used this as a guide, and then we developed an observation sheet. Next slide, please. Which we used to physically observe these workers. And then as we observe them within the period of observation, for every 60 seconds within the observed period, we indicate whether they are exposed to these risk factors or not. So as we observe the worker, within 60 minutes, if they're exposed to some form of awkward non-neutral neck posture, would indicate 1. If they are in neutral neck posture, would indicate 0. And so we'll do that for all the minutes that we're observing. Now, where the tasks were not changing rapidly, we would leave adjacent boxes blank. until the tax or the exposure changes, and then we quantify the corresponding exposure appropriately. Next slide, please. So we developed a tool, and we went through a number of validation processes, which are indicated here. And some of the components were easy to code, and so there were good agreements within those components. And some of the components were, a bit difficult to be able to quantify based on the nature and then how frequently or quickly these tasks were done. And so you can see here that those did not show very strong agreements, but they were acceptable agreements within those variables. Next slide, please. Then we also had intra-rater validation as well, which would tend to show very high agreements for most of the variables that we assessed in here. Next slide, please. Now, we went on further to compare our tool with existing tools to kind of like solidify the points that, existing ergonomic assessment tools may not be quantifying the exposures appropriately in informal work setting. And so showing some of these existing tools and then looking at how they would assess exposures, these indicated exposures using their tools, metric systems, and then comparing it with what we did. So the colors here, red, yellow, green, just shows the level of severity, red being very severe, yellow moderate, and green and being like no risk. And this shows how for the same type of exposure or for the same type of risk factor, different tools would quantify these, either overestimating the exposure or underestimating the exposure. And so emphasizing the problem that exists with using tools that were designed for assembly type of work and then using them in an unstructured type of work. Next slide, please. So Bernard would continue from here. Thank you.
So with this tool that was extensively developed by Augustine, we first quantified the proportion of this risk factor between the different category of workers. And we see that effectively there are significant differences. Here the example is between dismantler and burner in terms of exposure, and some are quite drastic, like you see that these moderate truck flexion are quite generalized in dismantler, but are less common in burners. For example, high force exertion as well is something that is extremely present in dismantler because of this manual work, but is less of an issue in burner, that they exert low forces in general. And then vibration is another aspect where we see that the dismantler are exposed to some vibration because of this hammering of the part that they need to dismantle, while the burner very rarely are exposed to these sort of shocks or repetitive shocks. When we say vibration, it's mostly repetitive shocks, but that's included in vibration exposure. Overall, you see that the exposure varies from one worker category to the other, and that's why the observation has to be performed for each workers, for each type of category that they work in order to have a good evaluation of their exposure. In terms of MSD symptoms, we observed that that are self-reported. Of course, we didn't have the financial support to have a medical examination of all the workers, but we noticed that the complaints, the prevalence was about 90% among the e-waste worker. We sampled about 70 collectors, 73 dismantlers, and 20 burners who are working per week on an average of 6 days and an average work duration per day about almost 10 hours. You see 9.95, which is extremely high. And the most region that are the most commonly cited for complaints of musculoskeletal disorder include the lower back as usual, the knees, the shoulder, the upper arm, the lower legs, and the necks. And the odds for developing musculoskeletal disorder are also differing between the collectors and the dismantler, for example. So meaning that, again, each type of workers has to be evaluated in their own context in order to determine what would be the proportion of musculoskeletal disorder they could develop and where they could come from. Because as you saw, the distribution of this musculoskeletal disorder vary also between different categories. So here we are illustrating the prevalence and severity of self-reported MSDs. And you see that the low back at the top is the one that most everybody complain. And when we compare that to non-e-waste working population, we saw that there was a significant difference as well, showing that e-waste is effectively very hard work compared to other type of work. Our non-e-waste working population was located in a nearby area of Accra, Ghana, and performing regular work, formal regular work. We also noticed that depending upon the age, the risk of developing musculoskeletal disorder or presenting musculoskeletal disorder was also very different. And of course, it's because the health issues, the young worker are just coming into the work, and the older worker are being exposed for longer period of time. And also the issue of time of work hours during the day was also something contributing to the development of risk and musculoskeletal disorder. And so we are presenting here a couple of issues as well as the different regions. And of course, the top one, the lower back, the knees and the leg, because most of the jobs are performing either standing or kneeling in most of these job categories. These are the three most prevalent area of the body that could be present, but again, in different proportion depending upon who is doing what. Now, one of the issues that we also need to mention is that we are presenting some average values, but we have to consider that sometimes collector become dismantler, and sometimes dismantler become burner. So in fact, as Augustine mentioned, there is a lot of variability, not only in the type of work that they do, that they usually do, but they also sometimes, because there is no work in their own category, they try to make some more money by doing some other jobs. And so that's why they pick up on the burner or collector if they are dismantlers. So these are sort of global number on average, but could be refined a little bit more in order to effectively assess what is the total exposure of the same worker during the whole day when they perform other tasks as well. So you see the complexity of the analysis of the exposure in these workers that are extremely variable. And so we here highlight these differences that the collector are certainly walking and pulling a loaded cart with medium to large torso flexion. Dismantler are mostly sitting with severe trunk flexion. They're also lifting and lowering heavy load and performing highly repetitive movement to dismantle their parts. And then the burner are mostly standing with severe trunk flexion. So these are the highlight of each category. And then, of course, in terms of severity, the rating over the week over which we observe these people were increasing by 3 to 4 points, meaning that when after a day of rest, because most of the time they have only one day of rest, after a day of rest, we can see that the severity of musculoskeletal disorder is increasing over the week, which is not abnormal, which is also observed in other population. But the increase is quite significant due to the fact that they work mostly long hours and have very little rest usually. So here again, collectors have more complaint about the lower back, upper back, shoulder, and arm. The dismantler ratings were for the shoulder, hand, and wrist, and for the burner, the MSD were essentially the lower back and the neck. And of course, there is an association between combined walking and working with the hands below waist, and low back pain has been observed in collectors. So we also try to determine some association between the exposure and the complaints, what we quantify and what they complain about. And we found a very complex interaction between what people do and what people complain about, which is not presented here. But we just want to illustrate in that slide the variability in work time between the different worker categories. So showing that some are working between 200 minutes and almost 500 minutes per day, and some are working usually for continuous hours and then having a long rest, while others have more sort of intermittent type of work, showing just again that the active work time per participant varies among the workers, but also varies among the worker categories and varies also as a function of the day, as a function of the type of work that they could be performing, as a function of the material that are delivered to them. So overall, there is a very high prevalence of musculoskeletal disorder among e-waste workers, much higher than other worker categories in the formal sector. And the exposure assessment method has been adapted to this unstructured, highly variable type of work and has been proven to be quite efficient. So that's what we were very satisfied, is having developed a method that is able to quantify the exposure and the variability of exposure, and also distinguish the worker categories and the origin of the musculoskeletal disorder, in order to propose in the future adapted prevention methods that could be working and that need to be tested in order to know whether they're going to be working in the context, of course, of this type of work, because you can understand that it's difficult to adapt prevention methods that are valid in the formal sector that will not work in the context of a bogloshi, for example, where the work is so different and where the context, the social, the psychosocial context, the material context, the financial context is very different. So we are working on these issues, and they need further development. Now, as I indicated before, the worker are also exposed to toxic environment. You see that the burners are burning material that is extremely toxic, and so that's also an environmental issue that is studied also at the University of Ghana. And we need to sort of combine our effort in order to understand the combination of these two exposures, as well as the psychosocial issues that were mentioned before, because these workers are in very sort of dire strait with low income, no protection, no medical assistance. And most of these workers continue to work despite the fact that they complain that they have pain, that they have injuries. For example, the burners are frequently burnt and the dismantler are frequently lacerated. They continue to work using over-the-counter medication. And so this is part of the psychosocial issues that we have to address in order to understand the extent of their injuries and the extent of their disorder that they have to sustain without any protection. So I'd like to acknowledge our colleagues, including Professor De Souza, Professor Fobil from the University of Ghana, and of course the workers that complied with our request to be observed and analyzed. And this collaboration between the University of Michigan and the University of Ghana, which was supported by different financial systems and grants. And I thank you for your attention. So thank you, Clive, and we can go to the...
Thank you, Professor Bernard. Appreciate your sharing this wonderful research. If you don't mind, could you end your sharing, and Professor Somnath, could you maybe share your slides?
Yeah.
To all attendees, please feel free to post your questions and using the Q&A feature. We will address them at the end.
Can you see my screen? Is
Yes,
it
we
visible?
can.
Okay. Now I'm opening my presentation. It will take a few minutes, I think so. Yes. Maybe now it is visible, I think so.
Yeah,
So I'm
the-
Shomnath okay, nice. So I'm Shomnath from India. I want to say something about the informal sectors in Indian informal sectors and what ergonomics and what we are doing in the informal sectors to increase the productivity and to improve the health of the workers. So as already mentioned that it is not, there's no government rules, regulations are there in the informal sectors. Clive already mentioned that thing. So in India also that the same thing happened. There's no regulations, there's no government rules. They have to work hard, they have to work more to earn more money. So that means that is the, if you work more, then you can earn more money like that. So there's, but the most important thing is the potential in the job. That is the tremendous potential in job in case of the India, for the informal sectors. So large number of workers in India, they're directly involved in the large number of people are directly involved in the informal sector. But the most interesting thing is there's a minimum personal relationship between the employer and the employee. And that is a very difficult thing, that is the relationship. And ultimately, when there's a minimum personal relationship, so the no owner of the informal sectors, no managers of the informal sectors, they bother about the health and the safety of these people of the informal sector workers. And they're normally all the employees, most of the employees in the most of the informal sectors, they're contractual or they're casual. So and this is the table what I want to share with you, that in different countries, gradually year to year, the informal sectors has increased. In India also, like in Algeria, in Kenya, in Latin America, India, Pakistan, gradually, from 1985-89 to 2005-2010, gradually is increased. The number of workers and number of informal sectors are also increased. And so what's the reason? The main reason is that the economic condition is improved by the informal sectors, for the working of the informal sectors, for the production of the informal sectors, the economic condition has been improved. So we never, ignored the informal sectors of course, in India, in other countries, other developing countries. So as you find in this table that in the different sectors, different industrial category, also the formal sectors and the informal sectors are there in India, but most of the workers, number in percent in millions, they're in the informal sectors. Like in agriculture, 1.39 million people are working in the formal sector, formal agriculture sectors, but 238.87 million people are working in the informal sector. So that there is tremendous work pressure, over there, the large amount of populations are directly involved in the informal sector. So as it is calculated, the 93% of the total workforce in India, they are directly involved in the informal work, in the different informal sectors. And the most interestingly, the female workers, they are more in the informal sectors because they rely more than the male workers in India. So as already Barnard mentioned, and Martin also, that in case of the informal sector, the main health problem is the musculoskeletal disorders. It's mainly due to the improper work activity. And there are the large amount of people, they complained about the different kind of musculoskeletal disorder. And the main problem is due to the musculoskeletal disorders, they bound to take leave from their work and ultimately they lose money, So we have to do something to decrease the musculoskeletal disorders among these people. So these are the different informal sectors in India. Some of the informal sectors I'm just showing over you. You can find some, the congested workplace, unsafe workplace over here, and the tools, design of the tools, and the repetitive movements. We can decrease these things because these are very much related with the development of the musculoskeletal disorders. So in informal sectors, the characters of the informal sectors, if we just find in India, that of course the work pressure and time is calculated as accumulation of the money, and work and time will become the stress. And in the informal sector, production has great importance than safety and health. So comfort, they don't think about the comfort. Comfort is greatly neglected. So what to do in the informal sector? What is the future of the informal sectors, and what ergonomics can do? We planned something, we are planning something in India that we can do by the ergonomics to improve the working conditions and other things. So the investigations of the health and safety is a very important thing, and proper structured researches we are trying to do among these informal sectors. But the main important things is recognition. So they need recognition, that workforce need to be recognized, and we are trying to give them recognitions, and their contributions also to be recognized, contribution to the nation also to be recognized. So if you ask my opinion, because we are doing so many years in the informal sectors, in the different informal sectors, I found that intervention is the only solution for the in India in the informal sector. But the interventions need to be tailored, need to be specific, and the word that we can say that the low cost intervention is most effective over here. But there are so many problems we feel during introducing of the informal sector, application of intervention in case of the informal sectors, the acceptability, the problem of the acceptability. So we try to find out the behavioral approach among the informal sectors workers, and we try to find out the socioeconomic status of the user, and that we go directly to the user or the informal sector workers to find out the problems. And then that is the participatory ergonomics, we try to apply that thing. And then we, among their, they give some suggestions, and we try to find out that whether it will be accepted by the owners, by the, the informal sectors. Because if it is high cost, then it will never be applied in the informal sectors. So we try to make it very low cost, and sometimes it is no cost. I'll give you some example about this thing. So some soft interventions and some hard interventions we applied over there, like the training, like the worker cycle, and the workstation redesigning of the workstation, modified hand tools like the modification, very little amount of modification done, by which we increase the productivity of the informal sector workers. And also there are some support also we give to improve the health of these informal sectors. So the efficacy is the very important thing in case of the, if we find out the interventions, if we apply the interventions to improvement of the productivity, health, and safety, we try to find out how much productivity has increased. We try to show them, the owner of the informal sectors, that is by applications of this intervention, you are finding that this is a very low cost, but you can find that the productivity has increased. Maybe it is not increased like the 100% or the 50%, but 30% is, it is 30% is more, more than 30%, or 30% is more effective than that without using the intervention. So they are become highly productive. I'll give you some example very quickly. I'll give you some example of application or intervention, what we already did in India. That is the central market area, that is the informal sector workers who have to carry the more than 100 kg weight over the head. And but we try to introduce the the wheelbarrow, but there's some political reasons and some reasons were there that ultimately they protect us, the owners of this informal sector. They just prevented us to introduce the wheelbarrow. Then we try to introduce the training, the soft interventions, on some exercises, very simple exercises we're giving to them. and we just watch them whether they're doing these exercises. And now they're very happy. They're without any watching. Now they're doing their exercises happily. And we find the physical composite scores and the mental composite scores has changed, in the positive order. So by the simple exercises, by giving them simple exercise, which is no cost, they're improving the productivity, also their efficiency and health is improved. I'm giving you the second example, what we did in the Chikam embroidery sector. It's a very large sector in India. The large number of the female workers are working over there, and they have to work continuously for the long hours in a very limited amount of space and repetitive movements. But the main problem we identified that the ineffective time. They have to find out some color threads from the entangled threads, and that will take some time. So, and also they have to work for longer hours because due to this reason. So in the process study, we find that the ineffective time or the time content, you can say, they added to the main process time, that is actually to finding out the thread. And we find the 40 seconds time they are taking for to find out a simple color thread. And as you know that in informal sectors, if you work more, then you can earn more. So the losing of the income is more over there to find out a particular color threads. Then we try to develop these things, introduce these things. These are all the partition box. It's a very simple thing, only 10 rupees. It's a less than $1. And happily they take these things. We give them the different types of partition box, and then ultimately they selected this one, the number 4 model. And the different color threads in the different partitions, and it's easy for them to find out the particular color thread. And we find that ultimately the saving of the time, like the 35 seconds. So that is like the 30% productivity is increased, and the only is by the application of very low cost intervention. So the solution, I should say in the conclusion, that of course the low cost ergonomic intervention is very much required in India to improve the productivity. And we're doing on the thing because the time is limited. There are so many interventions we already developed for the informal sectors, and they're very happy, the informal sectors workers, and also the owner of the informal sectors, because it's very low cost, so they can introduce it in the different sectors. Thank you for your patience hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Somnath, for your enlightening presentation on low-cost interventions in this informal work sector. I will ask our next presenter, Dr. Akran Salman Navarro, to kindly share his screen. Thank you, Akran.
Thank you, Clive. Hi, everybody. Share my screen here. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. So my name is Akran Salman Navarro. I'm affiliated at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And I'm going to talk a little bit about informal sector here in New York City, and also, how we are approaching the ergonomics and occupational health aspect of it. And just a little bit of context, I'm not going to mention what others already mentioned, but the most important thing is that informality, puts workers at higher risk and vulnerability. So, we can talk about inadequate earnings, poor working conditions, lack of protection, including, of course, occupational health and safety. And we as a clinic and as an initiative of the School of Medicine funded by New York State are addressing these issues as best as we can. I'm gonna talk about this a little bit today. So New York City is a large city, obviously, and it has its disparities within the city. Most of the poorest, very low poverty or high poverty cross-section with life expectancy and also where most of the informal work is. So if you see in the upper picture over here, which is the north of Manhattan and the Bronx, for example, you can also see that those are the most of the residents living in poverty. Most of them are minorities, Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. Life expectancy is less in that area, thus informality also it's very prevalent there. So it's kind of crosses the demographics with the health disparities and also informality. But when we talk about informality and we talk about vulnerability, we have to kind of think about health work as a social determinant of health. And when we actually address this as an umbrella with a bird's eye view and see it very macro, the World Health Organization talks about social determinants of health as a condition where people are born, grow, live, work, and age, and shaped by the distribution of money, power, resources. And if you think about the 5 traditional domains, it's described as economic stability, which includes work, built environment, which includes work as well, social community context, which also includes work, educational access and quality. Indirectly, we can address work on that domain, and health accessibility and quality is also indirectly included. At least in the United States, healthcare is not a right, it's a privilege. It's linked to your job. So it's very different than other countries where you can, regardless if you're an informal worker or a formal worker, you can just walk into any hospital and they help you, but here in the US it's a bit different. So now when we go, these social determinants of health, influence goes beyond working conditions. So when we talk about informality, how do we address these issues? Physically, emotionally, socially, all these influence the social determinants of health and can affect the family and communities. If you don't bring food to the table, you don't eat. If you don't go out and work, regardless if it's formal or informal, you can't pay rent. So you're evicted. So everything's linked. And lower levels of unemployment does not translate into a healthier society. And I want to stress on this as a context of my presentation. Usually countries and societies use the data of unemployment as the means of success in an economy. So the lower unemployment rate, the better your economy is. Well, that's really not translating to the actual health of workers. If you create jobs and there are jobs that are not safe and healthy jobs, then you're really, you're really making the situation more precarious, So so sometimes we see informal workers with less risks in occupational health risks and ergonomic risk factors than actual formal employers, because you're creating very dangerous employment situations. So with that being said, informality in New York City is historic. I mean, this is just a picture in Millbury Street in the 1900s. You see all street vendors, and it's not different today. This is the same street nowadays, almost 120 years later. So it's part of our society. It's one conversation I had with Clive not too long ago with the larger group said, it's formalizing informal work. It's most likely not the solution. It's how do you create a more dignifying workplace and more dignifying working conditions when people just work informally because they choose to or just because they're forced. So there's approximately, these numbers are very rough numbers. These are from the Comptroller of New York City, who creates a report every year. There's around 10,000 to 20,000 New Yorkers live and selling food and merchandise in the city. These are just street vendors. We're not talking about informal workers who pick garbage or informal workers who just deliver. These are only street vendors. So it's a large number. Now, it's a city of migrants. And, there's over 3 million migrant workers in New York City. And I stress a lot the migration situation because I also lead the global agenda for occupational health for migrant workers in ICO, and everything is interlinked. While studying migration and work, a lot of the workers become informal workers at some point in their transition. And there's over 300,000 undocumented workers in New York City. And a great percentage of that is in our informal workers. So we're talking about let that sink in for a minute, 300,000 workers who are undocumented within the 3 million migrant workers in New York City, who actually contribute a lot to the city economy, and I'll talk about right now. Now, depends if you're a voluntary migrant, forced migrant. Usually what happens is when you migrate, you go to another country. When you do it forced or voluntary, there's usually an occupational downgrading. So you see a lot of physicians back home, selling oranges in a corner, for example. Or you see engineers, working in construction. This is very common. And usually they're not, Maggie mentioned it very well, they're usually undocumented or on the process of being legalized, so they cannot be unionized, they don't have the benefit that they should, and they are part of an informal society. And there's cross vulnerabilities, sometimes you have aging workers with informal worker, and you also have pregnant workers working in informal society, and there's cross vulnerability sometimes. You also have child labor and so forth. So when I come from creating my whole career over 15 years in Latin America, and I moved back to New York City in 2016, and I said, oh yeah, I'm coming to the capital of the world. I'm probably going to see everything working the best it can, and it was actually I actually found a lot of more precarious or similar precarious situation here while doing occupational health and ergonomics than anywhere in the world. So it's a melting pot, but it's also a melting pot of benefits, but also of risk factors that are very similar to Southeast Asia and other southern countries. So you see stuff like this: work at your own risk, migrants are dirty, dangerous work. Informal workers, migrant workers, they do the work that people don't want to do. So they're important to society. They do contribute. During the pandemic, we recently published and coined a term, 4D jobs, which is the old 3D jobs. We just did some research and added the 4D, which is discriminatory. So now we're trying to talk about dirty, dangerous, demanding, and discriminatory. Why discriminatory? Because these workers, although they contribute to society, although they are part of our society, they do the work that nobody wants to do, and usually it's not reciprocal. You have workers that were going out during COVID, getting sick on your behalf, so you can be home safe, and these workers were doing all this work for us, and they probably didn't have any health care. They probably didn't have any social security. They probably didn't have any benefits that you and I do have. So it is discriminatory. It's the way it's set up. And, we're working on that through ICO and through other agencies. So migration has phases. You have pre-migration movement phase, arrival and return phase, and informality falls within all of these phases. You have, for example, migrants walking from Chile to Texas, and then what do they do on their way? They do work informally so they can get here. And the same thing happens in Southeast Asia, and the same thing happens in other countries. So informality is embedded in this process all the time, because you're obviously moving and you need to make ends meet when it takes you a week or a month or whatever to get to your destination. We also put out a statement in ICO not too long ago about the thousands of workers that died during the last World Cup in Qatar, just building the stadiums. A lot of them were migrant workers. A lot of them were informal. A lot of them were exploited, and they died just for heat stress and just for a simple inaccessibility of a glass of water. And thousands or tens of thousands are back home with chronic diseases like renal failure and stuff like that, in dialysis, burdening their home country's health system when they really got sick on a host country where they were migrated before, working informal. So these are just things to think about. Now, not everything is bad news. There are some good news. For example, out of these migrant population here in New York City, you know, 22% of the city GDP is contributed by this population. So we acknowledge this, and we are a safe haven for migrants because of this. It's a city of migrants, a city of you know, it's just the way it is. 52% of New York City businesses are owned by folks that were born in another country. So these are large numbers. And I work on New York City Health and Hospital System. Although I'm an NYU School of Medicine employee, we work under the Health and Hospital System, which is the largest system in the United States. You know, 11 acute hospitals, 5 nursing homes, 70 community-based primary care sites, and we're the only occupational environmental clinic in the system. And of course, you know, we don't have the means to help all these vulnerable or informal or migrant workers around the city, but we do pair up. And by the way, it's the oldest hospital in the United States. It was March 31st in 1736. So it's you know, it's very proud. It fills you with pride to work in a place like this, because it's been the same model the entire life. And you walk into our health system, and the first thing you see is we care about your health, not your migration status, for example. Seek care without fear. So it's kind of like a safe haven place where people can come in if you're a worker with any type of vulnerability. And there's public letters for this. And even our business cards say our mission is to provide the highest quality care and preventive occupational and environmental medicine services to those in New York City who are at high risk of work-related diseases and most in need of these services, regardless of your ability to pay. So this is the welcoming of workers, regardless of where you are, where you come from. So how do we service the city? You say, hey, you know, we're only 7 of us in the clinic. Well, how do you reach out to all these workers? So we created a model where we work together with community-based organizations, unions, organized employers, and proactive employers sometimes. Why do I bring in the employers when we're talking about informality? Because sometimes employers hire what we call jornaleros, day laborers, you know, so, you know, they just hire you for a day or for 2. There's not really like a formality on it. But then when you do the workers' compensation, when people get hurt, you were their employer at some point. So, you know, so it is important to know who are they. So we partner with all these community-based organizations. For example, Adhikar is a Nepalese organization who organize nail salon workers around the city, for example. Laundry Worker Center, we work closely with them. You know, they organize laundry workers, of course, and so forth, you know. And then how do we work with them? Well, you know, we create this trust with community-based organizations who actually are the ones who help these informal workers and these migrant workers to teach them, train them over their rights, their benefits, and their health and safety. And they do it we do it through train-the-trainer programs and other products that we have, so we can talk their language. During COVID, for example, you know, we reached out to thousands and tens of thousands of workers in the city, just creating awareness and fighting the vaccine hesitancy and, you know, what the importance of COVID. So we spoke their language, you know, in different language, literally. You know, for our health system at Bellevue, you know, we have a translation system that has over 190 languages and dialects. So, you know, so it's a very important thing. Here's just a list of all the trainings that we conducted during the COVID, and the essential workers, which most of them were informal workers. And then, you know, we go into the workplaces and we do ergonomic interventions. You know, we're not only going to the workplaces, but we also identify who are the most vulnerable workers within these industries. For example, we go to the car wash industry. There might be 1 or 2 employed, but there's 35 workers. So what's up with the other 33? You know, so we kind of like interview them. You know, are you formally employed? Are you not? You know, how can we help you? And then we address everybody equally. But that's how we do the ergonomics, you know, and also, you know, occupational health in general. Demolition workers are very prevalent when it comes to informality, especially asbestos removal, as you know, the importance of that, and silica exposure with silicosis. We also address that part. We create pamphlets and educational programs to everybody in different languages. For example, here's an ergonomic preventive pamphlet, literature that we gave all the employees around the city through the Laundry Workers Center. Just, how to have, how to prevent from getting injured and hurt while manipulating all these huge bags. As you know, New York City is a very dense city, and very few apartment buildings have actual laundries and washing machines. So a large population walks with their bag and hands it to a laundry worker, to a laundry center for them to wash it for you, So it's very prevalent that these workers come in with a lot of injuries and exposures and all this. We also have an ergonomic simulation lab that was funded by New York State, and it's maybe my primary baby creation, which is, we basically have equipment where we mimic what people do at work, because sometimes you can't get into the workplaces. So we have push-pull sleds, we have dynamometers, we have we simulate cooking, kitchen, and so we simulate tasks in the workplace, and we bring these workers who usually don't have any access to healthcare whatsoever, and we're giving them the opportunity to actually assess what are their issues and give recommendations to the physicians to use it as a preventive tool to diagnose the disease or not, and also create reports for the employer and for the workers and so forth. So these are all just, in the interest of time, I'm summarizing the slides, but this is most of the main things we do. And we also go to the day laborers, we go to Queens, Brooklyn, wherever we need to go, and then we see 20, 50 workers on a corner just waiting to get picked up, and they don't know where they're going. They get picked up maybe to cut the grass or to clean a bathroom or to do whatever. Although they have an employer that day and they get paid, they're still informal. So we go into these corners, partnering with the community-based organizations and train them on basic occupational health and safety. Sometimes we even provide them with PPEs and stuff like that, So this collaboration between community-based organizations and academia, it's basically us bringing the expertise into the community, hands-on and first-hand. The city also has initiatives who are very, very, very good initiatives, and we also tag along these. For example, there's about 8,000 to 10,000 canners in the city. Well, these are people who are just walking around picking up cans, and then they go and then they put them on machines, and they get paid, I don't know, 5 cents for each can. If you buy a can of soda, you're going to see when you open it, you're going to see there's a label there that says 5 cents New York State, 10 cents California, so you can tell how much they pay you per each can. So the city also understands that these are workers that are doing work that nobody wants to do, but it's extremely important. How much money are these workers saving the city by not having a 10,000 employee workforce doing this job? Their environmental contribution, for example, you don't have cans rotting everywhere in the city. We just, they're being picked up by these workers, and they actually get paid. These people get, they can gather $100, $150 a day, and they feed their families with it. So the city, there's a show canners love, some love, for example. So these are not our initiatives, these are city initiatives. There's other beautiful initiatives, which is we have what they call Under New York, which are performers who are, are artists, they are musicians, they are actors, and the city actually formalized in quote unquote their performance. So if you sing, for example, and you don't have the means to record a disc or your own record, you can just for free, you can register here, and the city gives you at least a dignifying space for you to perform. And while you walk in on the subway, you hear beautiful music or people just performing. So these are initiatives who are not actually formalizing the work, but they are dignifying the work. And these workers feel that they're being included into society. There's also trainings that you can just you can do who are by the library system and others. This is a great training that was done last year. Off the books, labor inequality and informal economy. So it's free. Anybody can just register. And the city actually has a licensing system for street vendors. The problem we're having is that, like the website says, the number of street vending licenses are limited by law, and long waiting lists are there. So there are good initiatives, but there always can be improved. Endalon is a national day labor organization. So they organize all the community-based organizations who are and nationally. So I know there's another presentation, so I'll try to stop in a minute or two. And I'm almost done here. So basically what we want is address with this occupational health for informal workers, sustainable development 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 16, and specifically focusing on 8, which is decent work. That's what we want. We also have an initiative of Global Coalition on informal workers. If you're interested in being part of this, you can also email me or email Clive. You can include you in the initiative. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Akram, for sharing this. I will quickly ask Professor Paulo to quickly get online. I know we're running out of time, but I hope we can at least get some perspectives from Brazil.
Okay. Oops. Okay. Good morning. First, excuse me because I don't speak English very well. And second, I promise talk only 10 minutes. We are okay. More than half of Brazilian workers are employed, like other countries with not India, of course, but today half of Brazilian workers are employed in the informal sector, and then 1.5 million workers are also employed, but in precarious jobs. For example, AP-based organization. Record high rates of internal migration. It's another aspect because there is a lot of internal migration. For example, today, the rural population is only 20%. And in the beginning of this cycle was 30, and the 19 was 30-40%. There is frequent immigration, another migration, the people from Brazil to another countries. For example, the high competence, high skills, these people are because the salary, the remuneration, and then they go to another countries. It's possible understand because the law in Brazil, the informal categories are considered employed in the private sector without a formal contract, unregistered domestic workers, employers without formal registration, and self-employed worker without registration, and auxiliary family workers. This is what the Brazilian law say about the informal categories, and this is in our statistics consider these categories. Today, there is a need to think of the relationship between formality and informality as a continuum, instead of representing a formal versus informal dichotomy. I think that like Akron, like for example, the Ghana is clear for me. This situation that this is a continuum, because the informal are working in formal process. Informality is not static, but rather a phenomenon in constant change due to ongoing socioeconomic and technological transformation. The historical perspective also reinforces the need to understand formality and informality as a phenomenon that affect each other. It is a phenomenon that is also represented in highly qualified activities that provide services to structured capitalist economic sectors and often linked to international production chains. For example, here. For example, we have the recent paradigmatic case of the international chain of stores. For example, CNA and Zara were workers in conditions similar to slavery, with almost no pay, worked to make clothes that were sold in European countries. And then the informal people in Brazil, like slavery, near slavery, they are working in the chain. They're working in process who, in the end, European countries, United States country, buy in this company a low price. The work began in an informal situation. Okay. The profile of the Brazilian informal subsistence worker is well defined: male, young, black, and with low education. Around 75% having complete primary education or less. In the age group of 14 to 70 years old, the group represents more than 80%. And at the age 18 to 24, informal subsistence workers accounted 64% of the total. There has been a decrease in stable manual factory work. There is a tendency for home working to expand, made possibility by new technologies, this concentration of the production process, and the regulation of teleworking. From 2014, there remain 3 processes took place that accelerated the growth of informal work: the economy and the political crisis. Remember that Brazil, 2016, there is a coup. There was a coup of d'état, and this political crisis in Brazil, just 24, is very difficult for the economy. The deepening of crisis with the COVID-19, of course, pandemic, it's not a problem, and the expansion of work via digital platforms, and then the grow the informal work into Brazil. For example, here we were in decrease just to 2014, but about after 24, here's an economic and political crisis just to 2016. Here, 2020, in the COVID pandemic, the people don't look for a job, and then the statistics is they ask for if you are looking for a job in the last 30 days or 60 days, and then this is because he's down. But now 21 is here, and the 23, the last statistical formula, it's like 50% for informal work. Here's the total working population, and then this is blue is informal contract, formal workers, and this is no contract, it's informal workers. And now 50-50 is formal and informal workers in Brazil. Another statistic, for example, the age, and then 25, just 49 is the group, and today 22 and 23 and 24 we are growing, and now more than 2019 in 2018. For the color of the skin, here is the white men's and white males is here. Here is black and brown people, and there's the total. And then this in Brazil, like in other countries, the informal workers is a social problem. It's a discriminatory problem, because it's not equal for everybody, every people. And if you are black, if you are male, if you are young, it's probably you are here. And then this is because we understand that this is not an ergonomic problem. The ergonomy can't work to change, but the really change is political, is social, to change this discriminatory situation. And for example, another statistic is the people from 15 to 29 old, the occupation is like this. First, this is the people who study and work. Here is the people only work, 15, 29, only work, don't study more. And here is the people that are in green, only study, or in brown, don't study and don't work. This is the and then in Brazil, the people early get out schools, early begin to work, and or formal or informal work. And here, Brazil, another situation. Here in Amazon, the forest Amazon, and here the north, and here the northeast. Here's the people more poor, and here the informal worker is more than the south and the southwest, where here is the factory, is the São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro is the biggest cities, and the economy of the country, the industrial economy is here. And then here 30-40%, and where is the informal workers? Santa Catarina is a local state who is the little, only 20% from the informal workers. And then 3 aspects seem to structure the new paradigm. Admission of private autonomy of the will. The people think that working alone, working with yourself is your private autonomy. It's not. It's day by day. The admission of the private autonomy, like informal worker, is like a private autonomy. The admissibility of collective bargaining is to the detriment of the worker, that is lowering the level guaranteed by state legislation. In Brazil today, for example, if a company do a collective contract, it's not obligatory to the law. You can, in the work, formally work, you can do the contract without the law, the travel law. And then, of course, formal work, it's day by day near informal work by by the law. It's very, very strange. It's very difficult for us, this situation. They changed the law in 2017 during the coup of the state. Of course, this is a coup of the state. And now the new government don't change. You say, oh, the coup the state changed the law, but the new government, theoretically democratic new government, don't change the situation. And the structuring of the employment category as a central category of labor law in the face of the employment contract that does not even guarantee a minimum wage. And finally, but not less important, negligence of the safety and occupational health standards by outsourced companies in relation to their employers, which has increased the risk of workplace accidents, like our colleagues talk, and the useless, less stable work and intensifies exploiting of working time. Thank you very much. I think I talked 10 minutes. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of our wonderful presenters and also our attendees for sticking around. I know we are over time, but I appreciate your willingness to stay engaged. We will transition to a Q&A at this time. I'm also showing on this slide the contact information, the email for all of our presenters.